Welcome to Legion Radio, a podcast about all things e-commerce, the official podcast of the private label Legion, hosted by Tim Jordan.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Legion Radio, the podcast of the private label Legion community. And today we've got another awesome guest. He has a lot of S's in his name. Don't mess this up. It is Mads Singers. And I've already messed it up pre-show and he corrected me. But Mads has lived all over the place. I know you're originally European, but you've also lived some in Asia. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm born in Denmark. I've lived many years in UK and Ireland, and I've lived many years in Asia now, and spent a good bunch of time in Middle East and Eastern Europe. So, yeah.
Where was your favorite place to live? Not work, and I'm not talking security, I'm not talking about infrastructure, just like the most fun place to live that you've been.
So far, I'd say my favorite country in the world is the Philippines. Unfortunately, they lose out on food, but on pretty much everything else. Occasionally internet, but the biggest thing about Philippines is the food. But the people, best in the world. Climate and temperature, amazing. And yeah, it's an amazing place to be. And particularly if you're not picky about great healthy food, you should definitely go to the Philippines.
I know somebody from the Philippines, and she helped me experience some of her local cultural cuisine. It was homemade ice cream that tasted like corn flavored ice cream. Have you had that?
Delicious, isn't it?
Oh, it was awful. I mean, if I'm eating ice cream, I want something sweet. I don't want it to taste like grain. So I can honestly say that's probably the only true Filipino culinary experience I've had, and it was definitely a strange one. So, all right, Mads, thanks for being on today. As you know, this community is mostly e-commerce sellers, and you have some experience in that as well, right? You've sold on some large platforms like Magento and also Shopify. You want to give just kind of the brief history of how you ended up, of all the things in the world you could have been doing, selling on one of those e-commerce platforms?
Sure. So occasionally I used to work corporate for big companies like Xerox and IBM. And I started doing a lot of management coaching before I left IBM. And I was dabbling in, I had worked sort of a lot of affiliate marketing and SEO prior to that. But I ended up partnering with a couple of guys around a coffee e-commerce brand in the UK, where we were selling coffee online, or coffee beans specifically. And yeah, that was unfortunately, I would say, a Magento platform. I don't think I've hated my life as much as having to mess around with Magento. Everyone says it's a lot better today than it was in 06, 07. I don't plan to find out, but that was sort of one of my first bigger adventure in e-commerce. I've recently just closed down an equestrian shop in the US that I was running with a partner of mine around equestrian equipment, and we were running it primarily on Facebook ads, and it was going really well for a period of time. But at some point, unfortunately, with Facebook ads prices just keep going up and stuff, we didn't really see enough profit to continue running it. But that was a Shopify store, so yeah.
Gotcha. So you've dabbled a little bit, and it's probably given you just a base understanding of probably a lot of the needs that like our audience probably runs into when it comes to scaling their business and automating and optimizing. And I know that the reason we were connected was you referred to me through, it was Pablo, right?
Yeah.
Pablo. And he was on one of our earlier podcast episodes, and he said, Tim, listen, you got to talk to this Mads guy. He's an expert when it comes to management and outsourcing. And I said, awesome, because I hear those questions all the time. Tim, how do I outsource? How do I manage these people? How do I grow a team? And as e-commerce entrepreneurs like we are generally like bootstrapped. We're usually solopreneurs at first, and making that leap into multiple team members or multiple members in the organization is super difficult. And I've gone from one extreme to the other. I have hired way too many people. I have tried to hire not enough people. At one time, I was strictly, hey, we're only going to hire domestic people that are physically in the office. And then we wrapped back around to, all right, we're never hiring anybody else unless they're a virtual assistant. And now we've kind of fallen somewhere in the middle. So this is definitely something I'm excited about this interview, because it's things that I struggle with. And it's things that I see a lot of our community struggling with. And this information hopefully will help me to pass on to those individuals as well myself. And hopefully everybody listening is going to get a lot out of this too. So why don't you start with how you got into your primary focus now, which is, you call it management coaching, correct?
Yeah, correct. So just a little add-on to what you were saying earlier before I kick off with that. So I've actually been in a couple of big masterminds. So Ezra Firestone's Blue Ribbon. I've been part of that that's actually where I met Pablo. And that was an awesome group of people. And likewise, Michael's Ecom crew, if you're familiar with them.
Yep.
So definitely one of the key reasons why I'm so interested in e-commerce is, again, I have a big background in it, right? I understand quite a bit on it. And that's why a lot of my coaching clients specifically are from the e-commerce side, right?
Sure.
As I mentioned, basically when I left the corporate environment, IBM, I had already been doing sort of management coaching on the side before I left, right? And the story, as it often goes, is I was doing like my 80 hours a week at IBM and my 10 hours a week doing my coaching. And at some point, I was making more money with the 10 hours than the 80 hours. And that's when you start asking some questions and start making some smart moves. And that's what I did. And initially, I focused a lot on working with large corporate clients, right? Because, well, everything else being equal, they pay better. And they don't ask so many questions. It's like, it's often easy money, if you will.
Sure.
But it's not so satisfactory. I mean, if you walk into a room, sit down with 10 people, and they're like, "Oh, great, I have a 4-hour break now." That's not the most exciting attitude to sort of coach and work with people in. So basically, I ended up moving to Asia. Where I was living in the Philippines, and basically, I worked with a ton of entrepreneurs. So Asia in general have a ton of sort of online business owners and also in the e-commerce space. And I basically ended up working with a ton of these guys, and so much more fun helping a small business because you constantly, like, straight away you see changes, right? Like I've seen people move from 30 to 90 people in short space of time just with a little bit of help, right? So like significant growth. And that's super rewarding as a coach. So basically as I said, I do coaching. I basically have what I call the 80-20 of management, which is basically a training program where I help both business owners, but also managers that are promoted, right? Because one of the key things I see consistently is that people promote staff they have to managers, but they never give them any training, right? It's like, yesterday you were customer service agent. Now you're manager of customer service department. Now you must be able to manage, right? And it's a bit like, well, you don't magically gain skills like that overnight, right?
Sure.
So one of the key things where I've really sort of nailed down and seen that companies can improve big time is actually in the training of the next level, right? Because often sometimes the entrepreneurs have the skills or the background, but most of the time they don't. But when you then couple that with people who have also no background, it's often a bit of a mess, right? And particularly in new organizations, it can, like, a little bit of training, a little bit of learning for these people make a huge difference, right?
So I hear people all the time say either you're a manager or you're not. And what they're usually talking in reference to are people that are very good at something. They might be a specialist, but that doesn't mean that they can manage other specialists doing the same things. And I'm not sure that I 100% buy into that, because I do think that there are people that are natural born managers, but I suspect there are specialists and people that are very good at something that can learn to be a manager. Now, what do you think the balance is there? Do you think that there are naturally gifted managers? There are people that will never be managers, and somewhere most of us fall in kind of in between, where we could do it if we had some good training? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I fundamentally disagree with your initial statement, right? Like, I think everyone can learn to manage. I think when people say, "Oh, he's a natural manager," it's often specific characteristics that they look for. So that will often be people who are quite assertive, can be rough and can get things done.
Sure.
But really, any kind of personality can learn to manage well, right? The key thing, again, like, management for me is like a skill. Like, it's like learning SEO or learning e-commerce. If you can learn e-commerce and make a multi-million-dollar business in e-commerce, you can definitely learn management, right? So for me, it's much more about learning to be the best manager you can be, right? So many people, it's like they look around and they're like, oh, I'm not like Elon Musk, I'll never be successful, right? And the thing is, that's killing a lot of people, because the one thing you have to do as a manager, the one thing I work with people on, is understand what are your specific strengths and what's your specific weaknesses. And how do you utilize that strength to be the best manager you can be, right? So, for example, a lot of sort of very technical people, they're very detail-oriented and very nerdy, and they might not feel as comfortable around people and so comfortable communicating, right? And you definitely want to improve those skills, but the natural skills and tendencies they have with being super analytical, very detail-oriented, etc. If you learn how to utilize them and be a great manager with that skill set, like, you can still be extremely successful, right? So I've worked with managers, literally any kind of type of personality and style and so on, and everyone can learn to be good managers, right? The one thing that stops most people is they often put their hands up and say, oh, management, I can't do that, right? And the thing is, if you tell yourself you can't do something, you definitely can't.
You're not going to be able to, sure. So what I'm picking up there is that there's not one way to manage. So when we figure out the type of personality we have, you can learn to manage differently. A super nerdy, reclusive introvert may be extremely empowered by using, automation tools to manage, project management software that, they can put down every little task that they want to and make sure everything is completely organized perfectly, where other people that are more social, are going to do better in more of a social environment managing and, actually picking up the phone and calling. And so there's not necessarily one right or wrong way of managing, but when we identify our own personalities and our own strengths and our own styles, then there is a management style that we can fit with us. Is that correct?
Exactly. And the key point is really, when you know who you are, that also enables you to pick a team around you that doesn't have the same strength as you have, right?
Sure.
So if you take super people-oriented, typical, if we say sort of typical sales guys, right? Love talking about themselves, just blah, 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 always going on. They're often super disorganized. They're often not so good at getting stuff done. Again, it doesn't mean they can't be successful, because a lot of it is, first of all, understand where they excel and really push that button, right? Because again, it's never about like sort of improving your weaknesses and becoming better at that stuff. It's about taking what you're really good at and really push that to the next level and utilize that strength to really become exceptional, right? And then it's much easier to hire people around you that can help make up for the downfalls that you have naturally. Because everyone have them, right? No matter what personality you have, there's always stuff you're much better at than others.
Awesome. So I wrote down some questions pre-show because there was, I got to thinking, what are the things that most people, if they could be live on this call with you right now, would be asking when it comes to management? And one of the things that I'm curious about are all these people that you're coaching, for management. What do you see in the realm of e-com entrepreneurs? Okay. So just use this segment of, your coaching students to give kind of a sample here. So small businesses, startup businesses, e-com entrepreneurs, what are the biggest mistakes that you see people making when they do try to outsource and start growing and begin to manage people? What are those biggest management mistakes that you see?
So the number one thing most people come to me with in the e-commerce space is, I struggle with delegation. Right? So many people feel, and I can see your smile, right? But so many people say, oh, I'm struggling with delegation, right?
Why do you think that is? Do you think there's something, and I have a suspicion, I have a guess, but explain to me why you think that's so prevalent among entrepreneurs.
So it's not naturally, it's more towards tech entrepreneurs, right? So like if you look at like SaaS startups and stuff like that, it's 100%. I would say in e-commerce is a little bit less, because particularly in the top of the e-commerce food chain, you'll see a larger variety of people types. But generally people who start out in e-commerce is often people that have some kind of strength that tend to be quite technical, which means they're naturally sort of logical, task-oriented people, right? And that's often people who know how they want things done, to put it politely, and they don't like when it doesn't get done the way they like it done.
Yep.
Right? And that in itself is often a hindrance for delegation, and it's often the mindset you have around it, right? So like one of the typical things to say, like, and in a few cases it's not the case, but most of the time, right? If you had like, let's say you have an e-commerce store today, right, that you've built yourself. Now, if you had 10 stores that was doing 90% as well as you are, or one store that was doing 100% as well as you are right now, what would make you more money, right? And most people normally say, well, 10 stores at 90% would be a lot more valuable, right? And that's how you should look at delegation, right? The whole point is, it's not that you can't get the same quality, but you cannot necessarily get everything you expect, and particularly in the beginning, right?
Sure.
What tends to happen in the beginning, the owner of a business knows everything, right? They're all knowing, and very often when they hire people, they expect others to know the same, right? Now, often when they delegate, they write down a task and they're like, okay, this is how you answer an email. It has a very complicated process that tells you how to press that button and that button to answer the email, right? They hire someone and they're like, hey, here's a process, follow this process, click the button 800 times every day, right? And that's not very interesting work, right? Now, if you can take the same work and make it interesting, right? Like if you pull someone aside and say, hey man, I want to hire you. I believe in you. I can see you have a ton of experience. And what we've seen so far, you're doing amazing. I trust you to take over our customer service, right? I've seen how good you are with people. I know you're going to be extremely good at this thing, right? I want you to own this thing. Here's the process that I have been using to do this. I know that can be improved, but I want you to take full ownership of the customer service, and I want you to make us the best in the business, right? Something like that. The difference between how people hand over responsibilities, and I say responsibilities specifically, not give tasks, but give responsibilities, makes a huge impact to the overall results, right? Because someone being given a task, they're like, okay, I'll do this task. And they sit down and, they're like, it's just repeatable. And they're not fun. It's not interesting. People are always like, oh, my staff never come up with suggestions for improvement. And that's why, right? When you actually give people responsibility, when you tell them they're responsible, when you tell them the expectations you have to them, right? They're much more likely to step up. I'm not saying everyone everywhere is going to do it, but I'll say they're much more likely to step up, right? And that's what you want, right? Now, initially, if you're up here with your knowledge and customer service, they will start down here, right? Now, when you started, you were down here.
Yeah.
But you're really good now. Now, they will start lower than you are now, but they have all your knowledge, right? So they can basically, they're not as good as you initially, but the whole point is customer service for them become the key thing. And what that does is that for them, because it's the number one priority, over time, they will actually become better than you at customer service if you let them.
Sure.
Right? And so the second thing that people often make mistakes with in this specific case is that they want to make all the decisions. So they're like, oh, if someone come with a refund, come to me with the case and I will make the decision, right? And that's always the wrong choice. What you should always do is, no matter what you want to do in the end of it, is you should always ask people to, when they come to you, if there is something like, let's say you wanted to review every refund request, right? You should always say, whenever there's a refund request, I would like you to, one, suggest the potentials you see for what could we do to deal with this one, and two, what your suggestion would be that we do in this case, right? And the reason for this is, if you just tell them, come to me every time this happened, you don't get them thinking. And when they don't think, they don't learn. And you don't know how good they are. If someone comes to you with 20 refund cases and every single time they pick the solution that you would have done, you're like, well, why is this person still asking me? You're very easy to say, hey, in the future, don't ask me, right? Sure. And I'm just using as an example, right? But people are so... they're so afraid because it's their baby and everything, right? But very, very often, I mean, personally, I love giving out responsibility and letting people make choices, right? I would rather they make the mistakes than I spend the time on correcting them up front in majority of cases, because in the end of the day, that's how they learn, right? That's how you learn.
And they will make mistakes, and they're not going to do everything perfect. And sometimes there's more than one right way to do things. They might just do it differently than you. It doesn't mean they were wrong. And I agree that we've got to get out of our own way and let them do things, even if it's a little bit different. As long as the job's getting done, it's fine. The alternative doesn't work, because the alternative is us making every single decision in our business. And we just absolutely can't do that. There's no way to function that way. This sounds a lot like that short book, 10-Minute Manager. Right. And I've read that, and it was kind of eye-opening to me, and it's basically not micromanaging these people. It's give them a task, and then a day later, find out how it went. And as long as they're doing a good job, let them go. And even if they're only at 90% efficiency or 90% accuracy initially of what you would have had them do, that's still better, because you can focus on the big stuff. So yeah, I agree. Your number one big mistake is problem that I have, which is delegating and trusting people to do other things. So what's another big mistake that you see people make when it comes to managing people in this type of business?
They manage everyone like themselves. And what I mean with that is people expect other people to be the same.
Yep.
So, for example, now here's a secret. Not all people are motivated by money.
That's true.
And I know that sounds really, everyone's like,
completely agree. Completely agree.
Now, a lot of entrepreneurs are motivated by money, which is why they're entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. If you don't understand that often a lot of your staff is not, you will make mistakes, right? So one of the key things I spend a lot of time in my training particularly is helping people understand different personalities and sort of personality types, right? Because when you learn to understand how different personality types are motivated, then you can really start pushing the right buttons, right? Like some individuals, you can tell them, oh, well, if you double your performance next month, I'll double your salary, right? Sure. And some of them will just say, oh, well, I don't care, right? And you're like, well, what happened? Why are they not doing anything? And seriously, some people really don't care. Now, those same people, to a very different scenario, if you said, if the team doubles the performance next month, I will double everyone's salary. If not, no one gets it. Now, those same people that don't care about their own money, if you put them in a situation of if they don't perform, they're dragging the team down, that will lit their ass on fire, right? So
that's what we all need.
Well, but again, right, you need to understand the different people you have to understand what motivates them, right? Because if you don't understand how to motivate your staff the best way, you won't get the most out of them, right?
Sure, absolutely. So I know in your management coaching and your at least light presence in e-commerce and helping small and medium-sized businesses, you've seen obviously a large need for outsourcing, because what you found is people are trying to manage everything. They have to, outsource this stuff. They have to be managing other people. And it sounds like you've become very proficient and kind of an expert at virtual assistant hiring and managers. I know that aside from your coaching, you also own a VA agency, right?
Yep, correct. So,
and that kind of happened by accident, was my understanding. You weren't planning on doing that. It just kind of naturally evolved?
It naturally evolved out from the coaching, right? Like what happened was a lot of the client I was working with were trying to find outsourced workforce. And a lot of them struggled, right? And it did take a lot of time to sort of get people up to speed and, teach them how to interview well, teach them how to find the right people, teach them how to manage them well, etc. And one of the things I realized was I hadn't found any consistently good recruitment, either platforms or areas where you could find staff. And since at the time I was living in the Philippines, I was like, hey, let's put two and two together. I'm excellent at recruitment, and I'm good at that stuff. So we basically set up a company where we help people get really good VAs, right? We also help partially manage them. And again, that's because what we saw eventually when we started was that, again, most people were unsuccessful with the VAs because they struggle to, again, manage them effectively, right? Yeah. So those that weren't my clients that were hiring VAs, a lot of them really struggled, right? Because again, if you're not used to management, then managing people who are sitting far away in a different time zone, perhaps in a totally different culture, doesn't make that easier, right? So basically the way we run it now is that we help find the people, we help manage them as so far as we we do all the sort of day-to-day, all the admin, all the I'm sick today, and take care of that sort of stuff, and basically our clients just have to work with them and tell them what to do and how to do it, right? So we try and take all the admin and all the sort of, my computer is now blinking red, and this program isn't working. We're trying to take all that away so people can basically just focus on what needs to get done and how does it need to get done.
So I know that a lot of people are all in on this concept of virtual assistants. They understand it. They're in favor of it, but in practice, they struggle. One thing that I've noticed is a very high turnover rate with VAs. Even internally within the company, and we have a lot that come on, they disappear, they turn out to be no good after 2 months. Their resumes aren't accurate, and they're supposed to be proficient at stuff and they're not. And I know that's not just us. I know that's a lot of people out there. And I have become very curious to whether or not this problem is caused by the virtual assistants not being up to snuff, essentially, or if maybe a lot of the responsibility for some of these failures in hirings comes down to us in our management and the way that we're trying to manage them and the way we manage expectations and incentivize them and try to treat them like a family, or try to, keep them outside the circle, so to speak. Have you also noticed a high turnover rate with virtual assistants, especially from the Philippines? Is that common, or is that just me?
So generally, again, a large part of it is management, but there's definitely also a fair chunk of it it's not just that it's their fault, but it's also cultural differences, right?
Sure.
So let me just go through the different ones. So management often is an issue, right? Again, understanding different cultures and so on is key. But also, again, when you're managing someone halfway around the world, I know someone, I've known clients that I've spoken with that, they're like, oh yeah, this guy worked for me for 3 years. And I'm like, have you ever spoken to him? Oh no, I just chat on Skype. Now, dude, if you manage and work with someone who's an integrated part of your company for over a month, and you haven't had a Skype face-to-face conversation with them, you're failing your managerial duties, right? And the thing is, if you don't build a relationship with them, if they have no sort of strong bonds to your company, and they suddenly get an offer from another company that's a good bit better, they're going to jump.
Sure.
So number one is, again, you want to make it a great place to work. And part of that is building great relationships, right? Now, the thing is, when you work with people remotely, you don't have the sort of day-to-day banter. You don't have the, oh, how are you today? How's it going? You don't have that in the same way, right? So a big part of my management system is making sure you do weekly one-to-ones with all your direct staff, right?
Sure.
And that's one of the key things that makes a huge difference here. Now, second of all, in terms of cultures, as an example, right? If someone in the family passes away, what happens in the Philippines is they basically spend 9 or 10 days with these everyday mourning ceremonies. And very often that's back at a village far away in the middle of nowhere where internet is still a hope of existence someday. And very often they won't be available for 10 days. Now, one of the challenges with the individuals is, so two things on that. One is people have very large families. So again, it's a very Catholic country. You very often have 10 siblings or something like that. And that just means there's a lot more people who can actually die. If you have 10 aunts or whatever, it actually means it will happen naturally more frequently than in the US, where you have an average of 2 or 3 kids, right? Sure. So things like that is more common. However, again, there's definitely also VAs who sort of, take certain liberties based on that, right? And then use stupid excuses. I would say, though, that happens everywhere, right?
Sure. That's not just a Filipino thing. That's a people thing.
I managed well over 100 people in the UK alone, right? And I can tell you that's a human being thing.
Yep.
So definitely not an exception, right? But it's often that sort of clash between the two. Now, another key thing here is, again, from a management standpoint, learning to set expectations, right? So actually be 100% clear upfront. if this stuff happens, what are you going to do? So for example, with our staff, right? Like sometimes internet cut out or you have a power outage. Do you have a very clear protocol that says, what do you do when that happens, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a small thing, but for business owner, it can be huge. If they're like, oh, I haven't heard from my VA for 2 days, he must have disappeared, right? From a business owner perspective, that fucking sucks, right? Yeah. But again, if the VA can't get online and there's not really a clear way of communicating, if that's the case, etc., that's tough, right? So again, like that, yeah, there's a lot of stuff around it, right? And it's not always sort of an easy solution, but sure. It's key. And for us, like honestly, being on the ground make a huge difference, which is one of the things that makes us very successful. So we have out of 130 people this year, we've had 3 people leave, right, over the last probably 13, 14 months. So it's a pretty good attrition rate, right, for our VAs. And generally, that's the kind of attrition we see, right? And again, it's a fair mix of good management, but also like understanding local culture, being on the ground, it does make some things easier. Again, my whole management team is Filipinos as well. And sometimes, unfortunately, I would say, Filipinos are more, they're a little bit afraid to talk to the scary white people and tell the scary white people. Like one example I have is on salaries, like, oh, my boss haven't paid me and it's sort of 3 weeks overdue. Should I tell him, or do you think he just figures it out by himself? You know, they're kind of sitting around hoping. They're kind of afraid to cause conflict. Yep. I'm like, well, if you haven't been paid your salary and it's past due date, people in the West would definitely say something.
Yes, absolutely.
So don't be afraid to do it. You're not offending anyone, right? And yeah, I know they're busy, but and that's the thing. As entrepreneurs, often we don't do things on purpose, right?
Yeah,
but
it's not malicious. Busy. We're just running around crazy. Yeah,
exactly. And if people just say, hey, by the way, boss, you forgot my salary, it's like, okay, no problem. I'll send it right now, right? But it's like, and that's sort of one of these sort of cultural things that can be a little bit challenging sometimes, right? But again, a key thing is, again, the better you know it, the more you can work with it, and the more you can also train people to understand your mindset better.
Sure. So let me ask you this. What can and can't be outsourced? And let me kind of set up that question is, there are a lot of things that we do in the e-commerce space that are easy, right? So it's just checking metrics on our Amazon accounts. It's, going into the back end of our Shopify and making sure that the orders are being processed correctly and refunds are done and customer service. But a lot of what we do that's really important is more creative and it's more decision making as opposed to task oriented. So, an example would be finding new products to sell. That's a lot of research. It's a lot of gut instinct. It's not like a 10-step process. And what I have found is that these really creative kind of abstract decision-making processes are extremely hard to outsource, where the more just delegatable tasks, of course, are. What do you think the line is, or where is that line drawn between what we can outsource and what we have to either do ourselves or pay a lot more for someone that's more experienced, maybe that's not a virtual assistant, to do these tasks?
Right. So just first off, even though I own a VA company, I'm not necessarily an advocate for outsource everything in the whole world, right? From a management standpoint, I always look at it as from where do you get the best ROI, right? Like if you can hire someone in the US and get a 3, 4, 5x ROI because they're super sharp at something, and if you hire someone in the Philippines, it's even break even, then you should definitely not outsource it, right? What I would say, a lot of the time, even these complex processes, you can still break them down a lot and you can still get a lot of help, right? Like if you look at product research, now if you look at very thorough product research, that can take a long time.
Sure.
Right? So like I definitely have VAs, like I have clients with VAs now that are doing product research and doing it successfully, right? They've been trained over time, right? But one of the key things for me is, well, let's break down the process, because if you start doing product research yourself, you're going to look at a potential mountain, right? Now, if you have certain criteria that you can set down and say, hey, go find products in this price range with these kind of attributes, no batteries, or whatever kind of criteria, and you can get someone to make your list of 50 products, right? Now that can still significantly lower your work volume, because if you get a list of 50 sort of potential great products, you can evaluate them, right? Yep. But it's also the best way to teach people, right? Yep. So again, you could say, okay, well, start by finding a list and then look at what products do you think are the best. Put a comment next to each of them. What do you think about them? Why would they be good? Why would they not be good, etc. Right?
So they're compiling the information and making it extremely easier for you to scan it, navigate it, make a decision. So they're taking 95% of the labor out of the equation, but you're not actually having them make the decisions. And if you give them good feedback in your process, then they will actually get better at doing that research too. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And like we're using it, the same technique in other scenarios, right? So a lot of companies do a lot of sort of cold calling, right? Sure. In the same example, you could have an expensive cold caller sitting in the US trying to figure out who to call. Or you could have a Filipino going through all the potential cold calls, actually add metric and sort of add information that will make it more likely to close them. And then based on that matrix, the people doing the cold call can then very easily prioritize and say, well, okay, these people are most likely to be best possible clients. Now, again, like a lot of the time, it's about breaking it down. And it's not necessarily to say, can they do all of this stuff? But it's mostly looking at what are the processes within this. And particularly when, like, you as a business owner, where can you save time is the most critical in any business, right? Because your time is the most expensive and valuable. So wherever you can sort of break down the process and get someone else to do a piece of it, that's super valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Super valuable information. So I don't normally do this, but I've actually been making some notes while you're going through. As soon as I walk out of this podcast studio, I'm going to implement a couple things that I think are important that you shared with us. So in summary, I think the big takeaways for me have been anybody can manage. You just have to be able to adjust your management style. So those of you that are listening, be encouraged. If you've sucked at managing before, it doesn't mean you can't learn. I'm a big advocate for learning. So whether that's picking up a good book and reading about management or getting involved in coaching, someone like Mads and his coaching program for management, make sure you're investing in yourself, because if you become a great manager, you're going to have a better business. There's no doubt about it, because we can't do it all. And there are some things that even if we did it, we're not necessarily good at it, so we need to be able to outsource and manage that. When it comes to VAs, Mads, I think you would agree that VAs can be hugely, hugely, hugely impactful for especially a startup, small entrepreneurial e-commerce business. Maybe can't give them everything, but even if it's not a task that we can give them a large percentage of that task. So like gathering information during the research phase, but we would actually do the product selection based on that, correct?
Yeah, one thing to add when it comes to VAs, right? A lot of the time people hire a VA and they're like, oh, I'll figure out what I give them, right? One thing I would highly encourage people to do is try and make sure you always have enough to keep people busy.
Yep.
Because very often, and I agree totally with the mindset, and that's what I say, even if you only fill half that time, it's probably still an amazingly good investment. But the problem is, if you only fill half that time, what happens is when you're bored, just like when you and I are bored, right? What happens is we start getting lazy. We're like, well, I can do it in half times. I'll just do it slowly, or, there's no rush. And the problem is when people join you, when people get a new job, they're usually hyper excited, right? And they're like, oh yeah, I want to go. I'm excited. I want this job. I love it. I want to do it. And then they're like, oh, there's no work, right? Yeah. Now, what often happens is if they have over a longer period of time, if they have a job that doesn't have a lot of work, they're like, oh, maybe I can do another job besides this one, or stuff like that. And trust me, that's not a situation you want to get people into, right?
Yeah, where they're taking on other work. And the other thing that we have found is they feel like they must not be important. Their job must not be secure. So from my side, I'm thinking, oh gosh, yeah, that person's only doing 30 hours worth of work a week, but right now I don't have time to delegate more to them. So it's still worth it to pay them for 40 hours. So I'm thinking that to myself, like, it's all right. They can just sit. They're cheap enough that, it's not worth my time stopping the immediate task. But to them, they're sitting around going, well, crap, if this guy doesn't need me, am I going to be fired tomorrow? And of course they need a job. They need a paycheck. So what they always end up doing, it seems like, is going out and looking for a backup job, which turns into a full-time job. And the next thing you know, they've ghosted you and they've left because you didn't keep them busy enough and make them feel empowered. One thing that I like to do is put them in regular groups with the regular employees, so to speak. So like I've got a WhatsApp group. I set up another one this morning with VAs, office staff, so everybody feels like part of the team. One thing we've done in the past is we've sent like company swag to our VAs in the Philippines. So we'll send them a coffee cup and a t-shirt and just like make sure they know that they're part of this too. They're not less of an employee. They're not less important. They're not less of a person. And that seems to have gone a long way in the past. It hadn't always fixed everything. We still have some pretty significant turnover compared to full-time employees here, but it seems like it definitely helped.
So two key things in that one. Yeah, I totally love that. That's important, right? What I would say, I technically I hate the term virtual assistant, right?
I do too.
I use it because everyone knows what it is.
Yep, completely
I hate
agree.
the term because for me, like again, if you have an employee in Chicago and one in Miami, like they're
just an employee.
virtual, right? They're an employee, and it's the same if you hire someone in the Philippines or India or Eastern Europe, like it's still an employee. Right. So very often, like it's not a term I like. Right.
Sure.
So that's one key thing. The second thing is the secret to keeping people busy is generally what I call forever tasks. Right. So I use a concept called forever task, which is basically have something that you can always get people to do if they have nothing else to do. Right. And for an e-commerce business, as an example, that could, for example, be product research, or it could be things like go search the web for potential affiliates, or go search the web, like any kind of research or lead generation, like go and find Instagram influencers, or something that can always be done, but isn't business critical, right? And make it very clear to them that you want to report on that every single month, right? So if you tell people and say, okay, every time there's nothing else to do, I want you to do this task. Don't say it's not important, but make them sure they understand it's important stuff. And every month I want to report on how much of this work you have done.
Yeah, it's important, but the timing can be flexible.
Exactly.
I just wrote that down too on my old school sticky note here. So that's awesome. I know we're about at the 45-minute mark. We got to be wrapping this thing up. Any last, like when you got on here, you were going to share one piece of information before you got off. Is there anything else left on the table that you haven't discussed that we can cover briefly?
No, I would say, again, even if you are starting out in business, right, one of the key things for successful businesses is hiring the right people. If you have great people around you, it makes your life a million times easier, all right, as a business owner. And that's, again, I'll just refer back to my training that I have, my management academy, and really suggest people if they feel the need for management learning, that's definitely the best place to start, right? So it's video training, and it's a super easy place to start, and it's super valuable, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, I guess that's a good point to wrap it up. Mads, thank you so much for being on. Anybody that wants to contact him, look up what he's doing. You can check out the show notes in the YouTube video. If you're listening to this on Podbean or iTunes or one of those audio places, check out these websites, madssingers.com, MADSSINGERS.com, and that'll give you a good rundown on Mads, and it'll give you a rundown on his coaching and management coaching and all that good stuff. Also, he has Aristo Sourcing, right? ARISTO Sourcing, which is his VA agency. And you can check out everything he offers there. It might be a good fit for you to start the outsourcing process or to scale your current outsourcing process. Really, really cool stuff. If you haven't done so yet, make sure that you subscribe to this YouTube channel. Make sure that you like this podcast so we can get a little traction, get a little love, and get this thing shared out there. And Mads, thank you again so much. I know you've got a ton of stuff. You got 120 VAs to manage, right? So I know it's valuable time that you've taken here to share with our community. It's really good information. I think it's timely. This is something I get asked about constantly. It's something that I struggle with. It's something that everybody struggles with. So I don't think that we can give enough good content and information about this. So really, really, really appreciate you being on here, and hope that we can continue to share content in the future and keep elevating all these entrepreneurs around us.
For sure. Pleasure being here, and really good talking to you.
All right, awesome. Thank you guys for listening to another episode of Legion Radio, and we'll catch you on the next one.
You've just wrapped up another episode of Legion Radio, hosted by Tim Jordan. Past episodes, links, and show notes can be found at privatelabellegion.com.